Team USA is training hard and ready for the Olympic Games. And so is Jacob.
Whoa! I've got my Lucky shirt and Xfinity Flex.
Oh yeah, Jacob's family got Xfinity Internet with the best Wi-Fi for their home and a Flex 4K streaming box free, plus Peacock Premium included. So Jacob is ready for anything.
Go Team USA!
With medal ceremonies, highlights, interviews, and more, plus all his favorite streaming apps in one place.
Can your internet do that?
Restrictions apply. Not available in all areas. Peacock subscription required.
Xfinity, proud partner of Team USA.
This is a CBC podcast.
Ready and Able is an ongoing look at accessibility and inclusion in this province. Our communities are about to change. Nova Scotia's new Accessibility Act heralds a sweeping strategy that aims to make the entire province inclusive and barrier-free by 2030. Over the next number of weeks, we'll look at what has to be done and what's on the horizon to make sure everyone can participate fully, irrespective of their abilities. As part of this process, government is developing new accessibility standards. They'll set guidelines for removing barriers to the built environment, such as public buildings and sidewalks. They'll also tackle barriers to accessing goods and services, information and communication, transportation, education, and employment. One of the people who has helped to guide this initiative from the beginning is Jerry Post. He's a retired municipal planner who became paralyzed from the waist down after having emergency heart surgery. He's an advocate for persons with disabilities who has worked to improve the province's Accessibility Act. And he served as the first executive director of Nova Scotia's Accessibility Directorate. He spoke with Wendy Bergfeld. Let's listen to some of that conversation.
Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
What can you tell me about when those conversations began about making the province of Nova Scotia accessible to everyone?
Well, I think those discussions have been going on for decades. But seriously, it was about 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, the province made a real commitment to it. In that, well, first they appointed Kevin Murphy as Speaker of the Legislature. As you know, he's in a wheelchair, so the chair of the House is fully accessible. In fact, the first in the Commonwealth, as I understand. And as well, they made a commitment to develop an Accessibility Act about 7, 8 years ago.
And that act was the result of a great deal of consultation. There was a lot of discussion about it. Can you tell me about how that back and forth went?
Yeah, it was interesting. When it was first announced, what they did was they set up a minister's panel on accessibility of people, first voices from around the province. So when they consulted, produced a report, which I thought was excellent. And then what generally happens in the prep of legislation, things go black and that becomes sort of a backroom activity. And what came out as a first draft was not what the community had been requesting. So at that time, there's a thing called the Law Amendments Committee where they review legislation. The community showed up and basically said, listen, this is not what we need. Have us directly involved. And that's how the consultation, the deep consultation really started.
And the deep consultation, I gather, was meetings where there was work with different groups about what accessibility meant to everybody. It sounds like the word accessibility was part of the discussion.
Well, exactly. I think the initial act was more about disability. And said, well, that's not about disability. It really is about accessibility, people having access to, to government services, to housing, to employment, to education, all those sorts of things. So that whole act sort of changed. And the other thing that happened is that the disability community came together. There's many organizations out there, supporting persons with disabilities. And all those organizations came together under a thing called the Bill 59 Community Alliance. The Bill 59 was the proposed legislation. And that consisted of first voices. And they met every Sunday for a couple of months at Dalhousie Law School. And we had the generous support from some of the law faculty members there who specialized in disabilities law, human rights law. And what we drew on as well is not just the legal expertise, we also drew on the experience of Ontario, where they have an act, and Manitoba as well. Those were the two provinces who preceded us. So we had a lot of support from people around the country, including the Rick Hansen Foundation and others, to provide us with information. So I think what we have now in Nova Scotia is probably, the best legislation in Canada. And hopefully the next province will outdo us. I understand in New Brunswick, they just made a commitment in the throne speech there to proceed. In Newfoundland as well, I think PI is looking at it. So it's having a rippling effect. And the feds as well, they recently passed an Accessibility Act to look after things out of federal jurisdiction. What people don't realize is that in Canada and Nova Scotia in particular, 30.4% of our population, according to Stats Canada, self-identify as having a disability. And it's 41% for seniors. And like myself, I'm in a wheelchair, so when you roll around in a wheelchair, you don't roll alone. Alone. Family is impacted, friends are impacted. I think so. Over half the population in Nova Scotia is directly affected by disabilities.
The Rick Hansen Foundation, that organization has come up in a number of interviews that we've done. What is it about the Rick Hansen Foundation that's been so critical in shaping this dialogue in this country?
Well, they have a lot of experience, of course, because of, it's been involved in advocating things for over 35 years, or 36 years now. So they've gained a lot of experience. But the other thing that they ended up doing is developing a certification program where they certify built environment buildings to a standard. So we became the second province in Canada to basically bring Rick and his crew here, and we partnered them with NSCC, and we are now providing training. And we have over 100 people that have taken the training. And, which is really important, we've also convinced Dalhousie School of Architecture and Plan to embed that training into their curriculum. Because, I'm not a person with a disability, I'm a disabled person. Because when things are designed properly, I'm not disabled. Basically things are designed to create me as a disabled person, like not being able to get into a building, for example. So it's really important to embed that whole notion of universal design into things. And from a city perspective, of course, the most important thing is public space, that it's fully accessible. So there are sidewalks. And it's not just the building of the sidewalks, this time of year, it's also the maintenance. So if a curb cut is not cleared, then I'm stuck home. Like I was stuck home for 4 or 5 days when we had the big storm because I just couldn't traverse the sidewalks in Halifax.
I want to ask about sidewalks and outside building, because I know that within buildings there have been adaptations and renovations, and sometimes they're being built specifically so that they can accommodate adaptations should that be necessary. But talk to me about streets and parks and those spaces. Where is the discussion around those?
Well, what you'll find out coming out, we one of the things in the Act that we have in Nova Scotia is a requirement for the province to prepare standards. And 6 of them, and the 2 priorities are built environment and education. And those priorities were set by community, First Voices. So we're coming out with proposed standards in the next couple of weeks. And again, we had 20 people from across the province involved, First Voices, people with technical expertise. And basically what they drew on was sort of best practices internationally, because a lot of work has been done on it, especially in the States. And we adapted them to our conditions if they need to be adapted for Nova Scotia. So that's coming out, and those regulations will hopefully come into force early next year. And again, we'll go for another consultation, and that covers things like parks, streets, parking lots, all those good things that we run into as citizens.
This act is being looked after by the Department of Justice, not by the Department of Community Services, not
That's
by
right.
Transportation, not by Highways. And
That's right.
and when you see the Department of Justice involved, what signal does that send?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that, Wendy. That's really, really, really important, perhaps the most important thing. When the initial act came out, it was still what we call a Social Services Act. We're doing this to be nice to these poor people in wheelchairs. And what we reminded the province of, this is the community speaking now, is that, just look at your human rights legislation. We're not asking for anything special. We're asking for something that is embedded in the human rights legislation. And the community recommended that they nest this activity, this function of government in the Department of Justice because it's all about human rights. So that's really, really important.
And with the Department of Justice, presumably the act has teeth because they enforce it.
Well, exactly. So we're going through that first. We're setting up the policies and the regulations right now. We're also looking at a whole sort of, enforcement compliance regime, and that must include education and awareness, because quite often people are doing it sort of unconscious bias. They don't realize that they're putting in place a barrier, and once they realize it, most reasonable people will take corrective action.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.